Welcome to everyone, and I will share my screen to start with the short introduction and with some information for you for this meeting. So I hope that you can see my screen. Hope so.
All good.
Okay, super. So welcome to our meeting, our webinar on conflict management through participatory processes. And we will discuss how protect areas can build good partnership with local stakeholders, especially about sensitive and hot topics. Some important notes for all participants. We are recording. Put your camera on if it's possible, because it's always much more easy for the speakers to discuss and for everybody to see the interlocutors. So if it's possible, please put on. Write your name and your organization near your space, please. For the questions, feel free to ask, to give us your opinion, idea, etc., using the chat. So my colleague Esther Bonsik and myself, we will manage the chat and we will read the questions for you. Record and presentation we will publish on the EUROPARC website. And at the end, please spend really few minutes to fill in the evaluation form, because this is very useful for us to receive your feedback. Today, after my introduction, and I am Stefania Petrosillo, Policy Officer of the EUROPARC Federation based in Brussels, we will listen the first experience from Valeria Salvatori. Valeria is a counselor and secretary of the Institute of Applied Ecology in Italy. She's very expert in large carnivores management. She's also a member of the IUCN platform. Then we will speak, we will listen to the experience in Sweden by Bernard Leroux, Dialogues Facilitation Gothenburg AB. This is the organization that he co-founded with other colleagues, and this is a facilitator and mediator. He will speak about facilitating multi-level stakeholder platforms in Sweden. We will have a moment of questions and answers and debate, and of course, our conclusions. I would like to stress that today, the topic, the discussion, and the aim of the day is to discuss on how dialogue and collaboration among local stakeholders and protect areas can mitigate conflicts. So, of course, we will learn about concrete experiences of management of large carnivores and humans coexistence. But the core of this webinar is to see how some lessons learned of this specific and very sensitive experience can be useful also in other participatory process with the stakeholders. Few words about our federation. Is the largest network of protect areas. When we say protect areas, we mean parks, Natura 2000 sites, reserves, and other categories of protect areas. We have around 400 members representing thousands of protect areas. We have 3 offices, the main office in Regensburg, and I am now in the office of Brussels. Then we have an office in Barcelona and other colleagues in Europe. Then we have also national and international sections. We work on nature protection, and all topics that are connected are absolutely necessary to take into account to reach the goal of protect nature. So agriculture, marine, tourism, climate change, large carnivores, indeed, health, cross-border cooperation, culture, youth, sport, and so on. We have a very rich website that I suggest to all of you to open. This is our the home page. In the home page, you can find the menu, the main menu, but don't forget to scroll down the home page, because in the home page you can find already the news, the coming events, our main programs, the flag program. Very important, you can fill this form to receive our newsletter. Please do it. You can also profit of the automatic translation if you are not very comfortable with English, and of course you can have a lot of information in our website, in our social media, sorry. So with that, I close my very short introduction. I thank you very much to all of you for your participation. Comments and suggestions are always very welcome. In general, you can write to the general address to EUROPARC. If you want to discuss or to have more information about the specific topic of today, feel free to contact me myself. Thank you very much. I stop to share my screen, and I'm happy to share the floor already to Valeria. Valeria, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Stefania. Let me just also share my screen. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I just want to thank you for providing me with this opportunity to share this work. Okay.
Perfect.
So what I'm talking about now is the experience that we have made while developing a service for the European Commission in the implementation of platforms for stakeholders in areas where the Commission decided or evaluated that there were some high levels of conflict due to the presence of large carnivores. Some areas where, so this is the contract. Why I'm not going to talk at length about what we have done and why and who were the participants, because this is not the topic of this talk. What I want to highlight is that based on the experience that we have matured, there are some particular items or aspects that really need care, because some things really don't work and some others might work very well. Bear in mind that any situation is a world itself, so you really need to take into account the local conditions and evaluate what is best. So this is the contract, and these are the areas where we were working. The first three were implemented within a contract that was signed in 2019. And Grosseto particularly was proposed by us. This is in central Italy, while the other two were suggested by the Commission. The third one in blue were established in a follow-up contract that was issued in 2020, and they were all suggested by the Commission. But they have some structural differences, because while for the first ones, we started from the bottom, relying on the willingness of people, of the so-called stakeholders, to be involved in a dialogue process. For the second ones, we decided to wait for the authorities to be fully on board and support the work that we were doing. So the issues, as you can read, are more or less the same across the different sites. There's Romania, where the issue was mostly about bears. I would say that Sweden started with the issue of wolf, but then it was broadened and focused on large carnivores, but Bernard will talk more about this. The others are more related to wolf presence, increasing wolf presence. Now, when we decided to start a participatory process, we based our expectations on the literature, on the experience that some members of the team had matured in other places, and we thought that by decrease attention, by involving the stakeholder in a decision-making process, we would increase the acceptance, and we would find, at least improve the management of these large carnivores in the areas. So this was the logic of the intervention. We were at a situation that the Commission asked us to analyze. We were going to start the participatory process, and we were expecting to reach a level of improved large carnivore management. But this logic went through some steps, intermediary steps, that were also related to outputs, in the intermediate outputs. So first of all, we thought that improving the relationship between people, between different stakeholders with different values and ideas would decrease the tension, and this decreased tension would allow them to commit and adopt proactive, collaborative attitude, so that they could share decision and improve the quality of the management interventions that were then needed to be implemented and would lead to improved large carnivore managements. Now, how we did that? We took some measures in order to ensure that we reached all these intermediary steps. We, of course, made sure that all parties were involved. So we paid attention who were the actors, what was the issues. We talked to each and every interested party in each area. We involved them in a process with some tools, facilitating tools that improved their relationship. And we supported them with technical information and tools that allow them to reach common decisions. And then we sought for endorsement by the authorities. Now let's see what has actually worked and what not. We gathered preliminary knowledge and understanding. This worked quite well in all the areas. In Sweden, it was particularly challenging because many actors had been already involved in some kinds of participatory processes, but Bernard will talk more about it. And this required more attention that we previously budgeted for. Where it worked very well was when the actors were already involved in some kind of collaborative processes. This is the case of Grassetto, for example, or Harghita, where they knew each other and they had already experienced some positive collaborative processes. We tried to include the extreme, and this was not always possible, not only because they were not available, not willing to take part, but in some cases we had to call for people from outside the areas that we were working in. We wanted to have people who were able not only to bring in the voice of the association, for example, that they belong to, but also personal voices, personal feelings, personal perceptions. And this made our work a little bit more challenging, because not always decision could be made at a personal level. They had to go back and consult with their partners. But we always developed or stimulated their innate ability to listen. And this was very important. They themselves established some rules, and they really wanted to listen to each other, sometimes for the first time. So this really worked. And then we were very careful in avoiding mismatch of expectations. People were not there to change the law, because we were not empowered to change the law. So this is very important, not let them believe that they can do more than it is actually allowed. And some of them wanted to make a difference. This was not always possible. In Sweden, maybe we are in the process, but not sure about this yet. The collaboration has improved the quality of the relationship. Well, in some cases, absolutely yes. Some people made friends with each other. Some people, like animal welfare activists, could see the importance of shepherds, for example, for the environment. And they built relationship. They destroyed this stereotype idea that livestock owners just abandon their sheep in the field. And in fact, some of them helped the livestock owners with some summer voluntary camps. So this is also something that that worked. If you manage to break this stereotyped idea, then a door really opens up, and people get to know each other. We then stimulated a constructive attitude. You know, we didn't really want to persuade one that the other had, you know, the truth in its value. We wanted them to respect their values. We supported them to see each other's values, but also we supported them in seeing something that they shared. So common values that could stimulate the interest of all the participants to do something for these common values. So stimulate their constructive attitude. This really worked well. We had to tackle unforeseen external events, and most of them were of political character. We couldn't really make much about changes in policy without consulting the stakeholders, without even communicating it to us at certain levels. Elections that changed completely the government structure and government policy. But we had to deal with them, with the group, and try again and again to stimulate local authorities to pay attention to what we were doing. So this was really something that made our work very, very hard, and you should, you know, whoever wants to engage in these processes should take in consideration. Then we tried to stimulate a sense of ownership, because only if you stimulate a sense of ownership, then the process might continue. These are processes that take ages to really make a difference in the community. And we had contracts for 3 years, which is, you know, barely enough to establish the relationship among people. So if they manage to develop a sense of ownership for what they're doing, if they manage to see that what they're doing is for their own sake, then you have just put a little seed in the earth. In some cases, this has worked only for a short period of time, but in some others might not work. Finally, did we reach the final output, an improved management? Well, we allocated tasks for the interventions that they themselves envisaged that could improve the situation. So yes, they were committed. They wanted to do something. In some cases, they did something, and this shared responsibility has worked. But the engagement of the authorities was really the missing point. In some cases, the authorities really resisted to be engaged, saying that they were not part of the system and that they were just waiting for the solutions that the participants were developing to evaluate whether they could be feasible or not. So this has caused a sense of uncertainty. Why did people had to invest their time and come to meetings if they didn't even know if what they had produced would be accepted? So this was very negative. And then the political willingness, how even if you don't know what comes out, I think it would have been really, really good if the authorities would have supported the process and engage in the dialogue to understand what was actually feasible or not. As I said earlier, these are processes that take ages, and having long-term views, if we have only project or contract-based financing, is very, very difficult. The only way is really either to feel yourself as part of the system, and then you stimulate or you continue to search for other funds, for alternative funds, or identify potential supporters at local or national levels. And we might have found some maybe in Sweden, we don't know yet. So looking back at the intervention logic framework, I think that this was the weakest part of the chain, and we had to find alternative paths to get to the final expected output. So we implemented pilot actions to demonstrate that different things can be implemented, that management can be different. And we are still working in some areas for stimulating the endorsement by the authorities. So a lot of green checks, some red crosses, but I think that the work that we have done has developed some basis upon which future work can be developed. So the main, and I'm finishing here, the main points: authorities on boards, very important, and this is the reason why for the second contract we didn't want to start from the bottom, but we wanted to know, to be sure that the authorities were on board and were supporting the process. Make sure that you gather accurate knowledge of the actual situation, that you don't miss important actor, that you gather an understanding of previous relationships between the stakeholders, what has happened. So you need to know the history of a place and the people. Very important, allow yourself to rely on the professional capacity of qualified facilitators. I found this, an incredible, they have an incredible capacity to manage difficult situations, and they are trained for this. So do not improvise as a facilitator. Try to get as adequate representation as possible of the different views, and envisage necessary time and resources, because these processes might take some time to get some results. So thank you very much. I remain here available for any question that you think you want to ask. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Yes, please feel free to put your comments, your questions in the chat. I have a lot, but I will wait my place, my turn, and I give the floor to Bernard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just also share my screen with you, and let's see. There you go. No, I'm sorry. Wrong one. There we go. Is that okay?
Yes. Okay,
right.
perfect.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'll try and be brief. I come from South Africa, but live in Sweden. So I'm training myself to really keep time. It's not always possible. I can talk for a longer time, but I'll be brief. And if you have questions about specific things, please ask them either now or afterwards. So let me just quickly give you an idea, maybe before I get to this, just tell you that my work as a consultant, as a mediator and facilitator is primarily today focused on supporting organizations, often within the public sector, to deal with conflicts and tension in a more constructive way through dialogue. And that's really what we try and do. Sometimes we do trainings, and sometimes we actually facilitate meetings. So it's a mixture. Now, the situation in Sweden involving large carnivores, in particular wolves, is very infected. It's become even more so in the last while. So just to give you a very brief idea, there are already in place some platforms, groups, organizations, really, where people met and tried to deal with some of the issues on a national level and on a regional level. But there are no local platforms. We soon discovered, and that's a real problem. But what we did was we, together with Valeria, spoke with the Environmental Protection Agency and decided that we would focus on two levels, on a national level first, and then we would see either on the regional or the local level, see what is possible. Can we create a difference in the way in which people interact with each other around this issue because of the extreme polarization? And just to give you an idea that it's become even more so today with the new government that's been elected. We had an agricultural minister coming out last week saying that they would reduce the wolf population by killing 300 or more wolves in the next years. There are only 480, according to the count. So, so you can imagine on the conservation side, the reaction, but then also it's very unlikely that the EU will allow this, which will then lead to even more disappointment, or people will feel betrayed by the politicians. And this is not only an impact on this particular issue, we see it in conservation of protected areas. It's the same resistance, that somehow one feeds into the other. So this makes it a very difficult situation to deal with. What we did to try and understand what was going on is to map the situation. And just to give you a very, very brief idea, we saw that not only the red lines, not only were there conflicts or tension between actors, but also within groupings. So we often see that when we have a really complex problem, which is also filled with conflict, it's not only the tension out there, but within the government agencies, within the government organizations, there's often a lot of tension as well, which makes the issue even more difficult to deal with. So what we did is we did a mapping and then an analysis. I won't go into it, but on the right-hand side, you can get an idea. It was just at the top on the right, all the actors that were involved. The bottom, trying to understand what actually was driving the actors, what was important for them, you know, how could and who should be speaking to whom. So that was the first task, because it's such a big issue. We needed to narrow it down. On the left there, you see something that we used an analysis instrument, and if you're interested, you can ask more about it. But it's really on the one scale, on the vertical scale, it's the level of complexity, and on the horizontal scale, the level of conflict. And this particular issue around large carnivores lands right up in the top corner, G, where it's very complex and very highly conflictual. And we had to consider, you know, how do we actually create constructive dialogue between the stakeholders on a national level and then later on a local level. So what we try to explore here, the purpose of and it differs perhaps from the other project that Valeria was mentioning, is to ask the question, if we change the quality of the conversation between people, would that make a difference? And Valeria showed that on the diagram, saying the hypothesis is if you improve the relationships, then you will decrease the level of tension. And I really subscribe to that. It was the same question that we went in with. And it's interesting because a lot of the conversations that we witnessed also and heard about and that we've been part of show that meetings are often just a series of monologues. People come with their prepared ideas, they've fixed positions, and it's one monologue after the other. And that's very far from what we're aiming at, to say, can we make a difference in the way in which people interact with each other? But in order to do that, we need some kind of neutral facilitation. Somebody has to create a safe space, make sure that the right people are in the room, get them there in the first place. And sometimes that meant, you know, sitting in somebody's kitchen and having a long conversation about all sorts of things to establish a form of trust in the facilitator, but also in the process. So to get people into the room, to make the space safe for them. And then the other important thing here, and it's from a conflict point of view, really important, is to not only create openness, but also clarity. You know, clarity about what individuals and organizations stand for, but also clarity in what others are saying and what the situation involves, because it is so, everybody sees it from their perspective, and it's only when we begin to share the way we experience and see things that we begin to find that clarity. We also discovered along the process that we really need to look at, in Sweden particularly, the need for hearing the local voices, making it possible for people to be heard, and for those voices to reach policymakers on higher levels, because it's very easy to consider policy without actually taking into account the real experiences of farmers, hunters, conservationists who live very close to the situation. And then the question has been and remains, how do we have dialogue when we have very different levels of power and decision making? You know, how does that work? So this was our starting point. We then went into a phase of really deciding where do we want to begin with the dialogue. So we started on a national level. Should we involve the regional platforms, or should we focus on on testing, as Valeria said, prototyping possible interventions on a local level? We wanted to really create synergy and talk about the need for communication between the stakeholders, but also we saw in the dialogues we had the difficulty of the communication on a vertical level. So let's say the horizontal is between the stakeholders, which is really important, but also how does the interaction work on a vertical level with authorities? And we've been asking ourselves the question, how do different platforms relate to each other, and realized that that's a difficulty and needs to be changed. So on a national level, we spoke about, we involved the National Council for Large Predators and had a conversation about what is called protective hunting in Sweden, and looking at how legislation is interpreted and applied, and why it is so different in different parts of the country, and why that leads to conflict. It was a valuable conversation, which was then taken to a higher level with the Director General of the Environmental Protection Agency and some of the governors who were responsible for zones, protective zones in Sweden. Then we had this challenge of what do we do on a local level, and decided there to test two alternatives. The one was to talk about an issue, the protection of livestock in Värmland, created a roundtable series of meetings where we spoke about with farmers, with hunters, with others, conservationists, about and with the regional state representatives about, what can be done and which difficulties arise and how can we iron those out. And the other was in Roux, which is an area in the south where a new wolf family has settled and has had cubs. And there it was more geographical focus to get local actors involved, farmers, hunters, conservationists, and met several times with the authorities from two different counties to discuss how can we improve the situation. And it's really interesting because we saw there how, just having a meal together, just sitting together and being able to speak freely, how the mood changes, how relationships change, and it's led to several very interesting results. First of all, we saw that there's been a positive response to dialogue. We noticed both on a national level and on the local level increased clarity and openness amongst those who participated. We've also seen that there's been increased synergy with it was an aim to feed all of this into the revision of the National Management Plan for Large Carnivores. So we've had a constant dialogue between that process and these dialogues on a national and then on a local level. And that has made a difference. We could feed in quite a lot that we believe has made a difference to how the management plan has been formulated. We identified key issues and the need for future dialogue. This is a project, and it's a pity that the project ends, and we really are looking for ways in which to continue and build on this experience. But then we had a number, and this is an interesting thing with complex problems and conflicts, I think, that there are often unexpected results, like, ripples on the water that you don't expect. So we saw that there was increased media interest. They made a whole series on this issue, a very good series on national television, where they followed some of these conversations that we had. We are seeing that in the county of Värmland, that there's an interest from the authorities, the state authorities, to replicate the model of local forums, local platforms, to deal with other issues like forestry, like protected areas, water, wind parks, and so on. We've also we also saw that there's been a demand for training people, amongst others, the national parks and the nature reserves. We've had training for people who work there, using the same idea that if relationship is put high up, and if making contact is important, it will change the tension that exists between people. So what we did on a national, regional level can be scaled down to individual meetings also. We see also that, so let me, so the unexpected results are many and they continue. One of them I just mentioned very briefly, Valeria is involved in as well. Of the larger project is a group of mediators in Europe meeting to look at environmental mediation training, which is something which is needed, the neutral platform. So just to end off, and I'm sorry that I'm rushing through all this, but to end off some of the lessons that we learned, and lessons I think that can be applied to all other, or to many other environmental conflicts, that these conflicts are often complex because they involve nature, they involve society, and we should be really careful not to treat them as if they are technical problems that can be fixed with simple solutions. It needs another quality of dialogue. And we believe that dialogue is not just something you do, it's a mindset and a skill set that can be developed and can reduce conflicts. And we saw that happening, and we continue to see it happening. Having meetings doesn't ensure that dialogue occurs, not to make the mistake that when people meet, there will be dialogue. It involves really working hard to improve the quality of the communication. And that is a conflict principle, that if you improve the quality of the communication, people themselves will find ways to deal with the conflicts in a way that suits them, not imposed on them. We also learned that dialogue is needed on a local level. We heard the same from our European colleagues, that it's really important that we develop the dialogue on local levels and even conflict resolution. And then those levels need to interact with regional, national, and I would say even European levels. But if we're going to deal with the increasing rural-urban divide, we really need to work hard on establishing dialogue on a local level. And so finally, competency is needed locally, and we're currently working on that to maintain this approach. We've established a Center for Natural Resource Dialogue, where we're hoping to build competency, not only in Sweden, but in Europe, for all levels, because we see that the demand is increasing and the need is big. I'm sorry, I took a few minutes longer than I should have, but that's all that I have to share. So if there are any questions, we can.
Thank you very much. I think it was really interesting. For me, it's not the first time that I heard our two speakers, and I always learn something new or new ideas. So we have 15 minutes together still to share ideas and questions. I saw in the chat that already Eik and Valeria exchanged some comments about the one bad experience and how we can learn from bad experience. I would like only to share my thought about that. Also thinking what Valeria said, also Bernard, about the risk to have bad experience with stakeholders. Because it's true, we learn, but then to build again a trusting situation, to have a new participatory process with them It's very, very complicated. So be very careful to not try, and then we will see, and then we will learn, and then we will try again, because I think it's not very, very good. We have a question from Teresa. If you can read it in the chat, the details, but Teresa asked if to change a little bit the scenario of the people, doing something different together, visiting the farms, sharing with wolf watching, etc., can create a different approach. And this is the question of Teresa. I keep the floor 1 second more to say, to give you also my question about the ownership, because Teresa, and in some way also Bernard, mentioned the importance of that the people involved in the process feel the ownership of the process. But I think that at the same time around, they have to be recognized as owner of the process. So indeed, again, the vision that authorities have of this process on the people, on the interlocutors and stakeholders mutually, they have to recognize that they are owner of the process. I don't know if I'm clear. I see that Teresa, Valeria is not, maybe I'm not clear. So I mean, ownership of the process, what does it mean? I am owner. I feel that I am owner of my process, but the other people around, and public authority especially, have to recognize my role in it.
Legitimacy, yes.
Okay, so this is my question and Teresa questions, and while you are responding, we will check if somebody else is putting some questions more. Please.
Yes, just a quick addition to the issue raised by Ike. Thank you very much for these comments. The platform in Lüneburg was one very difficult for us. We actually didn't want to do it in the very first place, because we knew it was going to be extremely difficult, but not because we didn't want to take the challenge. One thing that I showed in my slide, that from our experience, if you find someone who has previous experience and knows the situation, the local situation really, really well, and has previous experience with some of the stakeholders and is trusted by them, then it's much easier to get an easy and a clear understanding of what is going on. And this was the case, for example, in Romania, in Italy, a little bit in Spain. It was not the case in the second contract, because we were not the ones to choose the places where we wanted to intervene. We were directed by the Commission, who told us, you have to do this, such as, I don't know, a parent who takes his child to the doctor and says, please find a cure. And I think this is the real wrong approach. This is not a cure. A dialogue process is not a cure for an illness. Is just part of a process that you don't know if it gets to the cure, actually. So I think this was, the wrong approach to start with. As for the question from Teresa, we didn't take them out. What we tried to do was to have some convivial experiences. We we tried to organize, for example, dinners at a farmer's place, or things like that. But more importantly, we asked them to bring touching experiences. So, for example, a young farmer told us one day that she was looking for her sheep that were outside in the field, and she saw in front of her eyes a wolf just taking one sheep, and she felt helpless and desperate because she couldn't do anything to save the sheep. And this was very touching. And then we asked an animal welfare activist to tell us what he or she had heard. And it was a sort of a technique to stimulate deeper understanding and to put oneself in the shoes of the other and experiencing the same situation. It would be very nice to have first-hand experiences, but it takes more time. And when we contacted people, most of them said, well, I don't have time to waste just talking. I want to do something, and I want to do something concrete because I'm fed up of talking and I need the situation to change because I'm suffering. So we really tried to organize things in a manner that were the most efficient, but nevertheless without losing opportunity to share and to understand. I don't know if there is the issue of ownership, Stefania. Of course, it comes with recognition and legitimacy. Exactly. The others understanding that this process belongs to you, meaning that they legitimate your role and recognize that the process is actually part of the community. And this is not very easy and not very common either.
Bernard, would you like to add something?
I can maybe add to that question of ownership, because it's really difficult because it involves power to decide, and what we tried to do, because we did have the authorities involved, they were there in with several roles, is as part of the dialogue to process, when you get to a point where you say, well, now that we understand this process more deeply, we've shared experiences, we've heard each other's stories, the question is, what can we do? I mean, what can we actually change? And then we ask 3 questions. What responsibility can I take as an individual? Which responsibility do I need others in the room to take because I can't? And what can we do together? And I think just opening it up in that way opens for a situation that there's some things we can't change. There's some things we can do to help each other. And then there are some things we can actually do together to agree on certain things. And I think that's really important. And it created a sense of, well, those things that we can change, we will do and we will try. There's a lot more to say about ownership, but I think that's really an important step in such a process.
Thank you very much. We have only 6 minutes, so I will read a few other comments in the chat. One is about, but Valeria in some way already answered, if really is needed only concrete solution or also a new vision of the problems in some way. Maybe some stakeholder can suffer less if they see it in a different way. I hope I resume in a good way the question that you can find in the chat. Something more is a message from Vittoria Riboni that this is more connected about the topic specifically, that sometimes what the stakeholder asks is just a lower level of protection for wolf and for the other side in some way. But okay, this is very important, but it's part of the topic per se, not the participatory process. Instead, Federico asked 3 important points. What can be done to facilitate and promote the endorsement of local authorities? What role of protected areas in platforms and to build a dialogue? Of course, we are speaking about your experience, but for us, it's important the role of protected areas as EUROPARC. How to balance the expectation of stakeholders who want fast solution and at the same time, we need a lot of time for the process. Okay, I hope for the moment I read the most important things.
I can just
floor,
quickly,
please.
yeah, I can just quickly say a comment on this last point, which a little bit is linked to the point raised by Jutta. You know, sometimes, most of the time, actually, when we were talking about possible solutions, we ended up talking about anything but tools to, you know, manage large carnivores. We ended up talking about, you know, agricultural practices, the European agricultural policy, the way that people buy food without recognizing the role of livestock breeders and livestock owners. So we ended up talking about things that were completely, you know, out of the scope of large carnivore management. So it was sometimes an opportunity. You know, we started talking about wolves or large carnivores, and we ended up talking about cultural recognition and the frustration of these people that don't see the larger society recognizing their role in maintaining the landscape, for example, the maintaining biodiversity of these human-made environments. Some of them are actually protected by the Habitat Directive. So, you know, it was not easy to identify practical solutions that they could actually implement. And what can protected areas do? Well, one of our platform was in a regional park, and the regional park authorities were fully on board, and they were really, I mean, the management body of the protected area should be interested in the, you know, merging or finding a solution to harmonize the interests not only of wild flora and fauna, but also of the local communities. So I think they do play a pivotal role in these local platforms. And that brings us a little bit to the last comment of Victoria, who says that global planning, which provide areas suitable for wolf and not. This is zoning, and it's very difficult. You can certainly, you know, apply measures that allow a certain type of management outside protected areas, and in a lower level inside protected areas that can be thought of a source for the protected species, large carnivores. But zoning without large carnivores are not really what is allowed, and it's very difficult, very difficult.
Sorry, Valeria, I would like, yes, I would like to give the floor to Bernard to conclude. We are exactly at 3 o'clock. Few minutes, Bernard, to say your vision, and I will close the. Sorry for the others, but indeed we have only 1 hour for us. Bernard, please.
That's all. I'll just be very short. I do think that a lot of what we spoke about today, yes, it was large carnivores, but I think it's really important in protected areas, working with protected areas and other environmental conflicts, that we really find ways of improving the way in which the conversation is conducted. And I think there's a lot that we need to learn together. There's a lot that society can develop to make the level of conflict less than it is today, because I see it increasing everywhere. So my hope is that we will really put our energy into this work of involving and improving involving stakeholders and improving the quality of the dialogue that they have.
Thank you very much. I think we all agree, especially in this period you mentioned, when we see that a lot of positions are always more extreme. We really need to learn and to change our mindset. As you said, dialogue is not something that you do, it's something that you have in mind. It's your approach, your way to be. Thank you very much. I'm sure that we could stay much more together to discuss about that, but our webinar tried to be concise. Thank you very much for being with us, Bernard and Valeria. Very, very interesting. Thank you to all participants. We keep in touch. Please, we will receive now in the chat the evaluation form for this webinar. It's really 1-2 minutes, but please do it because it's very important for us. Thank you very much again, and see you for the next webinar. I don't know, Esther, if we have already a new date. If not, stay tuned. I show where you can find the information in our website. So, Esther.
Yes, we do have a new date, but it's not yet launched. We'll launch it in 1 week, and it will be on the 24th of this month on health and protected areas. So stay tuned.
So definitely a topic very important, especially in this period again. Thank you very much for being with us. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.